They thought the smiles would protect them, that if they kept their voices calm, their language polite, and their faces neutral, history would forget what they were about to do. They were wrong. The camera light blinked red. Live. That detail mattered more than any of them realized. Around the polished obsidian conference table sat 12 people who believed they owned the future. Executives in tailored suit, board members with rehearsed expressions, legal counsel with folders already prepared, a security officer near the door, posture alert but disengaged. Every seat was filled, except one. At the far end of the room, standing, not seated, was Elena Ward, black, female, composed, Chief Executive Officer. For now, she stood with her hands loosely folded in front of her, posture straight, expression unreadable. No crossed arms, no tension in her jaw, no visible resistance. That calm unsettled them. This room had fired people before. Publicly, quietly, efficiently, usually with tears, usually with begging, usually with shock. Not today. The atmosphere felt ceremonial, almost reverent, as if a verdict had already been delivered somewhere else, and this meeting was just a formality. "This won't take long," said Richard Huxley, interim chair of the board. His voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of a man who had never faced consequences on record. "We've reviewed performance metrics, strategic alignment, and leadership fit." Elena met his eyes. She said nothing. Richard continued, "Effective immediately, the board has decided to terminate your position as Chief Executive Officer." Silence followed. Not the stunned kind, the expectant kind. A few executives nodded faintly, like they were mentally checking off an agenda item. One woman adjusted her pen. Another man leaned back, folding his arms. The camera continued recording. The live stream viewer count ticked upward. Elena glanced briefly toward the lens, then back to the table. "On what grounds?" she asked calmly. Richard smiled faintly. "This isn't a debate," he said. "We're moving in a different direction." A board member shifted uncomfortably. Another checked his phone. From the corner of the room, the security officer straightened slightly. His hand hovered closer to his radio. "Elena," Richard added, still smiling, "please cooperate so we can conclude this professionally." She repeated the word softly. "Professionally." She exhaled slowly. "So this is how you're doing it. On camera." "Transparency matters," Richard replied smoothly. "Investors appreciate clarity." Behind him, a screen displayed the company logo. Sleek, modern, expensive. The live chat feed scrolled faster. Elena nodded once. "Then let's be clear." She stepped closer to the table. Her voice did not rise. "You've accused me of misalignment without evidence. You've called this meeting without due process. And you've done it publicly." Richard leaned back in his chair. "We're within our rights." Elena glanced at the wall clock. 9:02 a.m. At 9:02 a.m. you were. That got his attention. "What does that mean?" Richard asked. Elena didn't answer. Instead, she pressed a button on her phone. No sound. No announcement. No dramatic flourish. But across the building, something changed. Access logs froze. Internal dashboards locked. Financial reporting systems suspended write privileges. A compliance flag triggered silently. One executive frowned. "My system just logged me out," he whispered. Another tapped their keyboard. "Mine too." A murmur spread around the table. Richard's smile tightened. "What's happening?" Elena looked at them calmly. "Before you escorted me out," she said, "you should have confirmed who still had authority." Richard turned sharply. "Security." The officer hesitated. Elena turned toward him. "You might want to wait." The viewer count doubled. A board member's phone buzz. He glanced down. His face drained of color. "Richard," he said quietly, "the audit system just activated." "That's impossible," Richard snapped. Elena finally took her seat. "No," she said. "It's inevitable." She folded her hands on the table. 18 months ago, I initiated a parallel governance review through my holding entities. The room stilled. You don't have the power to do that, Richard said. Elena met his stare. I do, she replied, because I'm not just the CEO you voted on. She slid a document to the center of the table. Those are ownership records. Controlling interest voting trust. Sign. Filed. One by one, the executives leaned forward. Silence thickened. You staged my firing, Elena continued, thinking optics would shield you. But this meeting triggered every safeguard you ignored. Richard laughed nervously. You're bluffing. The camera caught his hand shaking. Legal counsel stood abruptly. Richard, these filings are real. Another executive whispered, regulators just acknowledged receipt. Elena nodded. The audit went live the moment you said terminated. The security officer stepped back instinctively. You can't do this, Richard said, standing. This company is not yours, Elena interrupted calmly. You managed it poorly. The live chat exploded. Elena turned slightly toward the camera. Displacing leadership is easy when you think power is cosmetic, she said. But power is structural. And structure remembers everything. Richard swallowed. What do you want? Accountability, Elena replied. And the truth on record. She looked directly into the lens. This board removed me without cause. They attempted to consolidate control while suppressing compliance findings. One director covered his face. Effective immediately, Elena continued. Emergency provisions are in place. Board authority is suspended pending review. Phones buzzed again. Trading just halted, someone whispered. Richard collapsed into his chair. You fired me on camera, Elena said softly. So the world will watch what happens next. The security officer cleared his throat. Sir, I've been instructed to remain neutral. Elena nodded. You did the right thing. She gathered her phone and stood. This meeting is adjourned. No one stopped her. By noon, resignations poured in. By afternoon, investigators confirmed formal inquiries. By evening, the clip was everywhere. Captioned, dissected, replayed. Not because she shouted, but because she didn't. Days later, Elena returned to the same room. Different faces, different posture. Authority rebuilt carefully this time. She looked around once. Power doesn't disappear, she said. It waits for the truth to catch up. The camera was off now. It didn't need to be on anymore. But what the public didn't see, what the headlines hadn't caught up to yet, was the private message Elena received as she left the building that day. A message that suggested the firing wasn't the beginning. It was the cover. Because someone inside the company had tried to erase something much bigger than a board coup. And in part 2, Elena would discover that the real threat wasn't the men who underestimated her. It was the system that trained them to. The message arrived 47 seconds after Elena Ward stepped into the elevator. No subject line, no greeting, just 6 words. You stopped the wrong meeting. The doors slid shut. The hum of dissent felt louder than before. Elena stared at the screen, her reflection faintly visible against the glass. Still composed, still controlled. But this time, something flickered behind her eyes. Not fear. Recognition. She didn't respond. She never responded to threats that wanted her attention. By the time she reached the lobby, the building was already changing. Phones pressed to ears. Assistants whispering urgently. Security repositioning. Not around her, but around the exit. Outside, cameras waited. Inside, something far more dangerous was unfolding. By mid-morning, the story had gone global. Headlines didn't call it a firing anymore. They called it a collapse. Board ousted after live coup backfires. CEO reveals hidden ownership, freezes corporation midstream. Power shift caught on camera. But Elena wasn't watching the coverage. She was watching something else. In a secure conference room 3 floors below ground, Elena stood before a wall of screens displaying internal logs, transactions, access trails, archived approvals that had never been meant to surface. Her private counsel, Mara Ionescu, stood beside her. "You were right," Mara said quietly. "There's a parallel channel. It doesn't report to the board." "It never did." Elena nodded. "I know. What I don't understand," Mara continued, "is why they rushed you. If this was about control, they could have waited." Elena's jaw tightened. "They didn't rush," she said. "They panicked." She tapped the screen. A pattern emerged: quiet transfers, shell authorizations, deferred disclosures buried beneath layers of compliance language. Not illegal on paper, just invisible by design. "This wasn't a board problem," Elena said. "It was a system problem." Mara hesitated. "Elena, this goes higher." Elena met her eyes. "I know." At 11:19 a.m., Elena's phone rang. Private line. She answered without looking. "Yes." A man's voice responded, measured, controlled, unfamiliar. "You embarrassed some people today." Elena leaned back in her chair. "They embarrassed themselves." A pause. "You understand what you disrupted?" "I understand exactly what I disrupted." Another pause. Longer this time. "You think the board was the ceiling?" Elena smiled faintly. "No," she said. "I think they were the cover." The man exhaled slowly. "You're standing in the way of institutional continuity." Elena's voice remained steady. "I'm standing in the way of theft." Silence. Then, "This doesn't end with them." Elena replied evenly. "Neither do I." The line went dead. Mara looked at her. "Who was that?" Elena stood. "Someone who just realized I wasn't supposed to survive today." By afternoon, regulators arrived on site. Not press releases. Not emails. People. With badges. With warrants. With authority no board vote could override. As systems unlocked under federal supervision, something extraordinary happened. The data started talking. Old memos resurfaced. Language stripped of polish. Decisions explained plainly. Patterns revealed. The company hadn't just been mismanaged. It had been harvested. For years. A junior analyst, new, overlooked, invisible, flagged a discrepancy. She hesitated before speaking. Then Elena looked at her. "Say it." The analyst swallowed. "These transactions, they're routed through entities that don't appear anywhere on our org chart." Elena nodded. "Because they were never meant to." The room went quiet. "Who controls them?" someone asked. Elena didn't answer immediately. She walked to the window. The city moved below, unaware, busy, confident in systems that promised fairness. Then she spoke. "People who don't show up on camera." That night, Elena didn't go home. She stayed in the building. So did security. So did the investigators. At 2:14 a.m., the first retaliation attempt arrived. A false report. Anonymous. By the time the sun fully rose, Elena Ward already knew. She stood in her office, coffee untouched, watching the city wake up beneath her. The world still thought the story was about a boardroom humiliation. About a black CEO who turned the tables live on camera. They were still behind. Because the board had never been the architect. They were subcontractors. Inside the federal task room. Temporary, windowless, secured, Elena sat across from people who did not posture. No polished smiles. No rehearsed neutrality. Only questions. "Why you?" one investigator asked plainly. Elena didn't take offense. "Because I was supposed to fail quietly," she said. "And when I didn't, the pattern became visible." She pushed forward a file. Not financials. Histories. A list of CEOs over the last 20 years. Black, brown, immigrant, female, each removed under different pretexts. Performance, culture, fit, realignment, all replaced by the same profile. Interim leadership, consulting firms, temporary oversight that never left. "You're saying this wasn't reactive," the investigator said. Elena nodded. "It was rotational." The room shifted. Another investigator leaned forward. Who benefits? Elena answered without hesitation. Entities that never appear on earnings calls. Families that don't need titles. Capital that doesn't introduce itself. Silence followed. Then one of them said quietly, "You're not just exposing corruption. You're challenging governance norms." Elena met his eyes. "No. I'm exposing that those norms were always selective." On the 9th day, the narrative cracked. Not from outrage, from evidence. An independent journalist published a long-form piece. Not about Elena, but about the pattern. The CEO conveyor belt. How power cycles without accountability. Names surfaced. Connections drawn. Boards linked across industries that claimed competition but shared advisors, legal firms, and, quietly, objectives. The comment sections stopped debating Elena's tone. They started asking harder questions. Why did this keep happening? Why now? Why did it take a black woman being fired on camera for anyone to notice? Elena didn't give interviews. She didn't need to. The documents spoke. Late one evening, Elena received a call she didn't expect. "Private number." She answered. "Elena Ward," a voice said, older, controlled. "You don't know me. But I voted against you." She waited. "I resigned today," the man continued. "Not because I wanted to. Because I was told to." Elena closed her eyes briefly. "Why are you calling me?" "Because they're afraid," he said. "And when they're afraid, they start erasing trails." Her eyes opened. "Erasing how?" "Deaths," he said quietly. "Careers. Record. People." Elena's grip tightened on the phone. "There are names you haven't seen yet," he added. "And they don't forgive exposure." "Neither do I," Elena replied. The line went dead. 2 days later, markets dipped again. Not sharply. Strategically. A signal. Elena watched it happen in real time. Mara entered the room. "They're trying to force a retreat," she said. "They want you to settle. To accept a restructuring role. A ceremonial win." Elena shook her head. "They're offering silence dressed as influence." Mara hesitated. "Elena, this is where people usually stop." Elena looked at her. "This is where people like me are told to stop." She stood. "Schedule the address." Mara froze. "Public?" "Yes." "No filters. No branding." The stream went live at 8 p.m. No introduction. Just Elena. Neutral background. Calm voice. "I was fired on camera because the people in that room believed power was permission," she began. "They believed that if they looked official enough, the truth would wait its turn." She paused. Elena nodded once. "Intent is visible when outcomes repeat." The questioning continued for hours. No one shouted. No one collapsed. That was the most damning part. Because by the end, no one could pretend this was confusion. It was design. By afternoon, statements were being revised. By evening, 2 institutions withdrew funding from the same foundation. Quietly. But not quietly enough. Elena watched the updates scroll past on a screen she had turned face down days ago. She didn't need to see them anymore. The momentum had shifted from reaction to consequence. Mara entered, exhaling. "They're calling it a watershed." Elena nodded. "They always do after the damage." "What happens now?" Mara asked. Elena stood and walked to the window one last time. The city looked the same. It always does at first. "Now," Elena said, "the system does what it's never been forced to do." "What's that?" "Explain itself." There was no settlement. No back-channel proposal. No ceremonial reinstatement. Because the people who once offered those things finally understood something essential. Elena Ward was not negotiating for access. She was closing a chapter. Instead, what came was something else. A public acknowledgement. Carefully worded. Long overdue. Still insufficient. Elena read it once. Then archived it. Because vindication was never the goal. Change was. Weeks later, Elena returned to the building where it began. Same lobby. Same polished floors. different energy. She stood alone in the boardroom, lights off, city reflecting faintly against the glass. This time, there were no cameras. There didn't need to be. She placed a folder on the table. Inside were the final filings, new governance structures, independent oversight provisions, protections designed not just for one company, but as a template. She had made the system visible. Now she was leaving it altered. Elena turned off the lights and walked out. Not because she was done, but because this part was. Power doesn't collapse when it's challenged. It collapses when it's understood. They fired a black CEO on camera, believing optics were authority. They learned, too late, that authority is accountability with memory. And memory keeps records. If this story moved you, shook you, or made you see power differently, don't let it stop here. Share this story with someone who has been underestimated, silenced, or told to wait their turn. Comment the exact moment you realized this wasn't about one company, it was about a system. Tell us where you're watching from, because stories like this travel further when they're witnessed together. And subscribe with notifications on, so you never miss narratives where arrogance collapses, truth rises, and dignity wins without asking permission. Because the most dangerous thing to unchecked power is an audience that finally understands it.